Hi everyone and welcome to Chris Mars Music. Today I'm extremely excited to tell you that I have an exclusive interview with 80s iconic frontman Sal Solo from the band Classix Nouveaux. They have a brilliant brand new album called Battlecry, and Sal discusses everything to do with this album track by track and how it was recorded. We talk about how he got into music in the early days, how we both ended up with the same singing teacher, along with so many great stories during the course of this 3-part special. Especially if you're a fan of Classix Nouveaux, then sit back and enjoy this in-depth, revealing interview and hope you enjoy it as much as we did recording it. Sal Solo, take one. Got this in 1986 when I was with a flock of seagulls.
Yeah, that's so professional, Chris. I'm really impressed. Nobody else has done that with me.
Yeah. It's just for my own benefit so I can get the cue right.
Excellent.
Well, here we are. Nice to meet you.
It's a pleasure, Chris. We watched your chat with Gary the other day, and we were suitably impressed. You did a good job.
I did my best. Yeah, he managed to get through it.
Well, I saw a thing. My friend Nick Beggs, who people know from Kajagoogoo, but is a session guy now, playing with Howard Jones.
Yeah, I know Nick.
So he was on tour recently with Boy George in Culture Club, actually, here in America. And I noticed that George went and did an interview with Bill Maher. I don't know if you know who Bill Maher is. He's really more of a kind of political commentator over here. But anyway, because it was George, I thought I'll give it a watch. And he didn't really let George get a word in. It was kind of like he had George sitting there and he just talked and talked, and poor George was, trying to interrupt and say something. So that's the difference often between a British interviewer and an American, because I sometimes tell the story. The very first really professional interview I did way back when was with the BBC World Service. So I had to go to Broadcasting House and up. And it was somebody really kind of well-known, like at the time, Jane Walmsley or some name like this, serious interview. She asked me one question. I spoke for 20 minutes, and that was the end of the interview. So as I was coming down, I said, wow, she was really professional, Over here in America, as I live in Florida, nearly all of them want to be celebrities. So they'll talk and talk and talk. They'll give their opinion on something. And then if you're lucky, they might turn around and say, so what do you think about that? So it's all about them. When I was still back in England many years ago, I was on the radio a few times on different stations. I had shows. And so I learned that the point of an interviewer is really to get the guest talking. That's the point of the interview, isn't it? The guest.
Yeah. Well, think Parkinson. I mean, he was just excellent.
Good point.
And you hardly ever heard him speak because he was just so good at letting people speak, which is exactly what I'm going to do with you right now.
Well, you got me thinking there. I also watched one of yours with Ricky Wilde.
Yeah.
There was a couple of reasons that was of interest to me, because both of us are from Hertfordshire, first of all.
Right.
And so I used to go to school near where they come from. And I think they sort of built a studio there. And the other thing was, I noticed there was a Wasp synthesizer involved.
That was amazing, wasn't it? Yeah. That Wasp.
So I was among the first to ever buy that thing, because as soon as I saw you could actually get a synthesizer that you don't have to plug into the wall, my mind was off going about all the things I could do walking around the stage playing the synthesizer, which I went on to do.
Right.
And after that, next thing, Casio came out with a little sort of calculator thing that had a keyboard. And so I was as bold as to actually take the calculator on stage and use it on some of the songs. It sounds ridiculous now, but hey, the things that were new back then, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, talking to keyboards, when did you get into keyboards? When was it?
Well,
what time? What sort of year was it when you discovered your love of synthesizers?
It was probably around the beginning of Classix, because we started at the end of '79, and it was really just a guitar band coming out of punk, but we had wider inspiration. So we didn't have a keyboard player in the band, so I figured I'd better start doing it.
Yeah.
And so I had on the stage by the drum kit one of those big keyboard vocoders that we use for certain strings and stuff like that, and then started supplementing that with, as I mentioned, the portable synths
Mm.
And one of the things I find funny now is I know some young guys who like to make EDM, dance music, or whatever you want to call it. And so, of course, all they do is press a button to get their sound, whereas we had to know how you had to
Yeah.
form the sound and the oscillators and the white noise and all that kind of thing.
And then, of course, you had the amazing revolutionary presets.
Well,
I mean,
we
on,
used
like for
to,
example, on Juno 60s, which is what the first keyboard I had actually was the Juno 60, which had the presets as opposed to the, I think the 106 didn't have presets.
yeah, I think we used to use a Prophet 5.
Right.
And so that would basically, I don't think they were actually presets, but it would record kind of about
Mm.
10 settings.
Yeah.
So before we had a show somewhere, I would have a floppy disk. Remember them? My
Yeah.
goodness.
Oh, yeah. I,
That's the prehistoric age, isn't it? Floppy
I
disk.
had lots upstairs in the attic, so I had to throw them out last year when I had the attic insulated. I had about 500 of them up there.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I can remember like arriving in Malta for a concert by the sea and going
Mm,
straight to the Prophet 5 to start programming the sounds in.
right.
And so that's how we had to do things in those days, wasn't
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I had
it?
my Atari 1040 upstairs as well, which was destined for the scrap heap after a while because I wasn't using it. But
Right. Yeah,
that was
yeah, yeah, yeah. That was the beginning of like sequencing recording, wasn't it? Because
it was, yeah.
I started using Cubase back in London,
Right.
and again, you had to have the Atari, and so things have moved on a long way since then, haven't they?
They have. What was your first recording console that you had?
Well,
Or tape machine, should I say? Was it a four
well,
track?
I thought you meant the studio actually, because I was recently reminiscing with one of my friends from another 80s band, and I said the first professional studio I was in was Utopia.
I
And
recorded in Utopia.
yeah, that was that I
St.
don't
John's
know.
Wood.
Was it in St. John's Wood? I thought it was in Covent Garden, but you might be right
Utopia's,
because
yeah. There was a guy called
I've been
George
for
Saunders
quite a
there.
long time.
But
But
mm,
when you go in a professional studio for the first time, especially back in those days, there was like a whole magic about it, wasn't there? You know,
yeah,
everything was huge and expensive. They had special designers doing the backgrounds, all the different booths and all that. It had
yeah.
a particular smell. My friend from Redbox, he said it smelled of stale beer and cigarettes, but I don't remember that. I remember there was an equipment smell. Or maybe it was from all the soundboarding and whatever stuff they used to put up. I don't know, but there was people that made a fortune from designing those studios, weren't there?
Yeah. Oh, Utopia was a great studio because I recorded that because my songwriting partner was Russell Bell from Tubeway Army for many, many years. In fact, we wrote so many songs in this room in here because this was the flat I used to live with my brother, and then I bought it off him years ago. But this was my bedroom when we first moved in. It's now my
We
studio.
better make it into a museum now. Then I
Oh,
think.
I know, yeah. There'll be a blue plaque on the wall. So Russell and I were recording in Utopia. We were there for a week or two and recording our original songs. But talking of keyboards, in fact, Russell had an old Mini Moog, original one with the wooden sides. He kept up
Yeah,
in my
yeah.
attic for a while, and I
Yes.
think that was one of the originals that he used for the old Gary Newman tracks, for the early
Right.
ones
Yeah.
that Gary
Well,
used.
I saw online that Gary Newman's doing an acoustic tour now, so that's really interesting,
That'd be
isn't
very interesting. Yeah.
it? You take away everything that made us sound, and then you see what's left.
Well, that might be quite interesting, actually. Just get an orchestra involved.
Actually, yeah, somebody asked me that the other day. They said, "Well, now you're back. Everybody does an orchestra album and then an unplugged tour. So what are you going to do?"
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to do any of those, but anyway, that's another story. No, Utopia, I was in a lot of times because
Yeah.
we actually did some recording with Classix in there as well at one
Mm.
point. I think we recorded one of our singles from the second album in there. That was probably the last time I was there, I should think.
Well, the album, I've been listening, I had a good listen to your new excellent album, and I made quite a few notes here.
All right, let's go.
And I want to go through them with you. Seeing as it's coming out on the 14th of November, I believe.
No, the 14th is the listen party.
Oh, that's
So
right.
for people who signed up, or if you're not signed up, you can go to Bandcamp and sign up for that.
Yeah.
So that's the world's first opportunity to hear the whole thing, and that's a Tuesday, so it comes out on the Friday, November 17th.
Well, I must say, it is a fantastic album. It really, really is. I'm not just saying that. I really genuinely like it, and it's there are some great sections in all the songs. Um, it's it's definitely a Classix Nouveaux signature. The DNA is running straight through it, and it's just a brilliant album. It really is good. It really, really is good. From the first track, "Fix Your Eyes Up." I mean, that's a classics track. I'd say it's.
Well, we always say we wish we'd have written that 40 years ago because it would have done well in the charts back then.
Yeah, well, maybe it'll do well in the charts now. No, but it's a really, really good track. When did you actually start writing these songs? What inspired you to restart and get the whole classics thing going again?
Well, it's really this new phenomenon that exists of aged rock and rollers.
Yeah.
Because something I guess we would never anticipated back in the day, nobody would, is that when people are 50 or 60, they're still into their rock and roll.
Yeah.
I mean, you think back, people, our parents' generation or anybody that we knew was kind of over 30, really, we thought was old, and they probably, more or less stopped living and enjoying things.
Yeah.
And musically, now, I'm not sure if you're old enough to remember when the early years of Radio One, like even a lot of music on there was just like these brass bands, and they used to have lunchtime things. I want to say Mantovani. I'm not sure if that's who it was, but it was always these sort of nasty, like cheapo sounding ballroom artists. And so that was what we thought old people like,
Right.
And so, I mean, bands were finished in a few years, weren't they? Even the Beatles only lasted 7 years, even though they have a new song now, so-called.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, the Beatles did everything they want to do in 7 years, and usually you had your band, and then you did it, and then that was it. You kind of moved on with life. And so that was what we thought would happen, and indeed did happen for 30 years or so. But because everybody's online these days, I suppose maybe we have to blame Steve Jobs really for that.
Yeah, probably.
So now that everybody lives on the internet, everybody can give their opinions online. That's the first thing. But the second thing is they started all these fan groups. And so initially we were not really aware of it and not that interested, to be honest. I mean, I might have received an invitation or something. I wouldn't have bothered following up because I thought, Classix Nouveaux, that was long ago, gone and forgotten. But eventually they started, there's more members, they're posting more and more. And we would see that they've got things like tickets from old concerts in Leeds or in Hammersmith or whatever, if they can get hold of flyers, every kind of memorabilia. They were even posting the dates of our record releases. And it was like, how do they know that? We don't know that. Where do they get this from? So after a couple of years of this, we started to feel a sort of sense of responsibility. It was like, this really matters to people. This thing that we did is important to people's lives even today.
Yeah. Well, it's memories. You've created memories for people, and listening back to your music, they get stimulated. It's the same with any music, really, isn't it? It's such an important part of people's lives, and obviously
yeah. I think we've always known that pop music, rock music, whatever you want to call it, is really the soundtrack of our lives as teenagers.
Absolutely.
What we didn't know before was that you just never let go of that.
Yeah.
And so the fact that out today we've got somebody I read somewhere, probably online the other day, it said all the bands from the 80s are back. It's like the 80s have returned, but it's not just the 80s, because you've got the 70s and the 60s as well. And so it kind of almost seems like anybody who's ever made music or had any success is now doing it again for their particular fans. I saw an interview the other day with Cliff Richard. It was Piers Morgan. Piers Morgan was interviewing Cliff Richard. It must have been old because it said he was 80, and I guess he's about 83 or 84 now. But it was so interesting because he had a studio full of fans, and I'm thinking, well, how old can they be? Like, I guess all these old people who have followed Cliff Richard since he was a boy are still into it now. So anyway, we decided as a little sort of thank you to the fans to do a kind of musical birthday card, really, because they're always posting these release dates. So May seems to be in a time when a lot of our records were released for some reason. So we said one year, okay, May, we'll do a song. And it was a little challenging because two of us live in America. One lives in London, one lives in Ireland. But at the same time, with the internet, obviously, it's easy enough to exchange files these days. So we revisited one of the songs from our first album, Inside Outside, and did a sort of attempt at a modern version. And that was that, we thought. But the fans immediately, they started saying new material. So this was scary because we'd never really thought about doing anything, any classics in the 21st century. And so, first of all, the thought pattern was, well, we can't recreate what we were doing back then. We can't get into that mindset any more than you can get into your clothes from when you were 20 years old, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so, what are we going to do? Has anybody got any songs lying around left from back in the day? And we didn't. So, that was the struggle for a few weeks. And then suddenly, one day I got the idea we don't really have to be like we were back then. How would we be today? If we were a band together today, what would we sound like? What kind of music would we want to make? And so that was very liberating. And so from that moment, then I got the inspiration to start writing a load of songs, enough for an album, really. And that was the start.
Did you have some ideas before you actually sat down to write? Did you have ideas in your mind that were just hanging around over the years that you decided to actually physically get out of your head and onto the computer? Or
well, once or twice over the years, if I had a moment when I really wasn't doing anything, which is rare, but over so many years, there's been the odd moment. And so with all the increased technology, sometimes I would think, if we did a Classix Nouveaux song now, how would we be able to make it sound with what was not available back then? So I've done a few little things like that, but I hadn't really thought about writing new songs for Classix Nouveaux. It didn't seem like there was any point really, and I just didn't have that mindset. So when we came to this new set of songs, it was quite interesting because then you're thinking about who the musicians are that are actually make this thing happen. So it's very different when you start, for instance, BP, our drummer, he used to be in X-Ray Specs. He was a very powerful drummer. Anybody that ever saw us live would have known he was really extraordinary. I mean, he was so loud. My goodness, he used to have two huge speakers by either ear rather than wear headphones. But that didn't quite come across on the recordings, partly, I think, because the style of music back then was very robotic, very controlled anyway, very produced. And partly, we didn't really know how to capture that. Because I think it's hard. We started talking about Utopia and other studios. Well, Utopia must have cost an arm and a leg back then. And so because studio time was so very expensive, you were very careful about what you did in the studio. You couldn't really waste it because you'd be wasting hundreds of pounds, if you just didn't record something in an hour. But now, of course, we got the technology to capture anything you can imagine, pretty much. And so that was one of the starting points, was getting the really powerful drum sounds. Gary with the guitars, partly he was very restrained back in the day because it was the time of synths and not really guitars. So we didn't do guitar solos and all that. And also in the interim, of course, he's become very accomplished. He's done courses on classical and on funk guitar. He's a teacher, not only guitar, but also bass and drums. And so it was really quite exciting to imagine an unlimited palette for this new venture.
Right. Well, Your album, I must say, there are so many sort of colourful tracks on there. I don't really know how else to describe it. There are so many amazing textures of sound and energy. Is that how you expected it to come out?
Well, I think definitely the energy is a good starting
Yeah.
point because, for instance, the album is called Battlecry because the title song Battlecry, it says, while we're yet live and breathing, this is our battle cry. Some people interviewing me have thought it's about war and violence, but say not at all. It's about the idea, here we are coming back as old men, but we're not ready to die yet. You know, we're not going to lie down and pass out. Rather, we're back with a vengeance. That's really what that's saying. And so we wanted to kind of give it all of the energy we would have had as 20-year-olds. I mean, almost you could say some of the BP punk aspect is in there. And some of the records that we liked back in the day that expressed that kind of fire, Adam and the Ants, you know, Temple Tudor. There's a lot of those sorts of elements in. I mean, even I'd say there's almost a bit of big country in there. It's just got a slightly, I don't know. I mean, I know there's some bagpipes in the intro, but it's more to do with the fact it's got this sort of thing like a sort of rock anthem about it, doesn't it? You know,
Definitely, yeah.
That's what we felt with that. And then, of course, we really expand in some of the much heavier tracks like Final Symphony. And
that's a great track, actually. Yeah.
Revelation song "Color Me the Sky," where we just totally let rip with what the musicians wanted to play.
Yeah,
and that's something we've never done before, and we never would have done before.
"Color Me the Sky" actually is gave me a little taste of made me think of Rush. The parts of it where we have some of the acoustic guitars and then goes into the electric guitars. That mix is I found it very cinematic.
Yeah, well, I'm
quite progressive, may I say?
Well, yeah, I thought that. I said to BP, I said, I think there's some touches of prog rock in this album.
Definitely. I'm a big fan of prog rock, by the way.
Well, the funny part about that was something that we discovered while we were making the album that we'd never talked about back in the day. Is BP said he was inspired to take up drums by John Bonham.
All right.
And I said, the first concert of my life was Led Zeppelin at the Royal Albert Hall as a kid, you know, from school. And then Gary said he was inspired to take up the guitar by Hendrix. So, you know, we never knew there was all that whole kind of rock side to us that we had not explored before.
Well, there's definitely a rock side coming out. I'd say more than rock. There's definitely a prog rock side coming out. But I mean,
you're right, because I'd kind of forgotten about all those sort of bands. But as a kid, me and my friends, we used to go and see, obviously, all the bands that were the new thing, which was the prog rock in the 70s. So we'd seen Gentle Giant, Hatfield in the North, Gong. A band, actually, I think one of the first bands we saw was Wishbone Ash. I'm not quite sure if it's prog, but I see now they seem to be having a kind of resurgence, because when I put on YouTube, there's all this Wishbone Ash stuff going on. And so it takes me right back. So I think that's probably like a hidden influence that we just didn't know that was there, but we'd absorbed as very young kids, and now finally it's kind of coming to the fore.
It is. Well, in fact, I mean, if you analyze a lot of Coldplay's material, apart from the super commercial singles, a lot of that is very progressive, and they're huge fans of prog rock, and they've got some incredible album tracks which could be a track off a Genesis album, you know, from the 70s. It's quite bizarre. Talking of Genesis, actually, there's the fifth track, No Do-Overs. There's a very reminiscent line there with the bassoon style solo.
Oh, okay.
Which it really reminds me of Tony Banks of a track called Madman Moon on the album A Trick of the Tail from 1975-76.
Oh, you better text me that, and I have to go and check it out.
Yeah, it's Mellotron in the background. Obviously, you haven't got Mellotron on that track, but it does remind me of that kind of that era, which I love. I really love it. It really touched me, that track. It's fantastic, very reminiscent of that style.
Well,
which
No
I, but
Doovers, No Doovers is our new single coming out this week.
oh, excellent,
And, yeah, so we have video for it and everything. And
great
we also,
track.
thanks. We also have a competition because I don't know if you log this, but the lyrics of that song is 18 hits from between 1980 and 1990. So it contains all these song titles from back in the day. And so we're going to give away a signed white label, the only one in the world actually that exists, to whoever is the first person to catch all the songs. You're not included, Chris, because you already had a listen.
Okay. Well, can you explain the title actually?
Well, I think actually this was the first song I started writing for this new
Yeah.
album. And so I suppose I was reflecting on the kind of age we are now, how we kind of idolized all of our artists, our songs back in the day.
Mm.
And so we can still enjoy them, but there's no going back. We can't go back, obviously, to how we were all those years ago, but we can still enjoy it and appreciate that it's part of our life. So therefore, when I start to mention titles of songs that we know, they kind of turn on a little light, don't they? When you hear a particular, oh yeah, I remember who did that. Or you might think of the video, or
it takes you right back. Takes you right back, doesn't it? Yeah.
That you were watching. But the way that the way that the song ended up sounding is interesting because first of all, this is kind of down to Gary again because he sent me an acoustic guitar strum. And I never thought of that for that song or any really. We'd never had that on any classic song before. And when I heard it, there was a few things actually, which is part of the fun of sort of doing an album separated because you don't know what the other people are going to do until you hear their part. So I had this strum guitar and it was like, well, that's kind of too good to waste, really, rather than just putting it behind the synths and all that. And also, it kind of sent it off in a totally different direction. Because although you're picking up on a Genesis thing that I wasn't really aware of, but the starting point was Bach, of course, the air on a G string.
Yeah, well, suite number 3 in D major, to be precise.
Exactly. All of us ignoramuses. I mean, actually, some other people call it the cigar advert.
Oh yeah, yeah. Hamlet, is it?
I guess.
Benson Hedges.
Actually, I have to confess that back when that advert used to be, and I probably didn't know it was Bach. I probably thought it was just a commercial. But now I'm a little bit more sophisticated in my old age, So I did know. Actually, it's not only that, but the other day I was. Oh yeah, it was when I was talking with a friend of mine who been produced by this producer called David Motion, who'd done some of my stuff as well. And so David Motion's first hit was Strawberry Switchblade.
Oh, yeah.
And the song, it was something about yesterdays, I don't quite remember. But anyway, I went and I read online that the opening piece had come from, I think it was a Mahler's Fifth Symphony or something like that. And I realized it was exactly the same melody I'd used in an early classic song, Guilty, and it had also been used in a 70s song, Beach Baby. It was First Class, I think, was the name to that. I think it was really a Jonathan King thing. So those 3 hits all had that particular melody, but I never knew it came from a symphony.
Oh, really?
I don't know how it was floating around in the ether, but you're probably classically trained, I'm guessing, as you know all this stuff.
Well, I was classically trained as a piano player, yeah.
Yeah.
Opera singing.
Opera singing as well, huh?
Well, I don't sing opera, but I had an opera singing teacher.
Oh, okay.
Turner de Brett, who taught George Michael, to be precise.
I went to her.
Really?
I did.
She's still around. Did you
Really?
go to She was living in Finchley. That's where she had
Yes.
Did you used to go there?
Yeah, well, what happened was when I did Sandemiano, so that was out in 84, 85. And so I had this choir suddenly come in and start singing on my stuff. And around that time, as I was doing the album to go with that, I was getting the London Community Gospel Choir came in for some songs too. So I was suddenly intimidated by all these great singers. The classical ones, the boys and the men that were singing in that choir, and then all the great gospel singers. So I started to think I need a singing teacher. I'd never had any singing lessons. And so I was looking around. I think I read in a Melody Maker article or something that Tony Brett had tried to teach Johnny Rotten to sing or something. So, oh,
I
well, that's
believe
good.
so.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
try. I'll try her. So I called her up, and she said to me, "Oh, I've seen you. I've seen you on TV. I don't think you need singing lessons." And so I said, "Well, I think I do." So I went along. Funnily enough, the person coming out from the lesson before me was from Wishbone Ash. It was
Oh.
Laurie Weisfield. So we used to say hello, you know. Actually, fantastic guitarist, by the way. I didn't appreciate so much then, but lately I've seen some of him. Great, great guitarist. I think he's the best one I've ever had. But so she asked me what I wanted her to help me to achieve, and I said, well, my voice is very deep, so I'd like to try and increase my range, my upper range. And she said, oh, Elvis had a deep brown voice, nothing wrong with that. But she gave me the singing exercises and stuff, and I think really what it did for me more than anything else was it just gave me more confidence in singing. Now I knew how to do it, what the process was, so I thought, okay, I'm doing it okay now. I'm not sure that it increased my range any, but it stopped me doing a lot of the growling and screaming anyway.
I actually found when I was clearing the attic, I found an old bit of paper, one of her sort of worksheets, red lorry, yellow lorry.
Exactly. Red lorry, yellow lorry, red lorry, yellow.
Yeah. I've got that in there somewhere.
You had to do it to a scale or something. Red lorry, yellow lorry,
Yeah.
red yellow lorry. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
Interesting. Yeah. What about the other tracks then? Never Never Comes.
Well, Never Never Comes is revisiting our third album, and it's kind of strange because now that everything is online, you can learn stuff about your music you would not have otherwise known.
Right.
Never Never Comes was a huge hit in Poland. So any Polish person who's about the right age, if you say Classix Nouveaux, they'll say to you, Never Never Comes. In England, what happened was the budget on our third album, a studio budget, got completely blown by our American producer, Alex Atkin. So when it was done, EMI decided to not spend any money on promotion. They used the promotional budget to pay the studio. So it's kind of thrown out as a single with nobody ever really knowing. But now, recently, I looked on Spotify and it has 1.7 million plays. And that's way ahead of any of our other songs. People assume our well-known hits would be the popular ones, but they're not. This song is way ahead of anything else. And young people like it. I know young people in Florida, like in their 20s, and they've gone and they've explored Classix Nouveaux, and they come to me singing Never Never Comes. My nephew in Welling Garden City, who wasn't born when that song was out, sends me a message of him singing Never Never Comes. So it's completely curious. Like, this is a song that's got a whole life of its own, way beyond what anything we would have even imagined. So when we went to try and revisit some of the old classic songs, this one did kind of take on a new lease of life and sounded like a new song. And so the guys in the band really wanted to include it. And so that was that. But funnily enough, that's not finished yet either, because first of all, on the album, if we revisited something old, we wanted to do something different to it, significantly different, so that people wouldn't think, we're just taking the easy route. But I was recently talking to some Polish, radio DJs, and one of them said to me, "It's too modern. I don't like that new version. I like the old version. This is for young people."
Really?
So it got me thinking, okay, well, we could do a few different versions of that, because we could do a version that's kind of more similar to the original for people like the Polish folks that are very attached to that. But then one of Gary's friends was saying we should have a dance mix of that. So right now we've got a couple of people doing extended dance mixes. So we're waiting to see how that turns out.
That'll be very interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
I noticed an Oriental touch to it.
Yeah.
Was
Well,
that
the way that
intentional?
well, the way that came about was back in the day, Classix used to tour all around the world,
Mm.
and especially in very obscure places. We go to Thailand, we went to India, and everywhere that we would go, I was very fascinated with what the local music might be like.
Mm.
So I'd buy records of the indigenous music, and then I'd be listening to that for a while and thinking if there was anything real interesting. Plus, it was around the time when Peter Gabriel started experimenting with world music and the Fairlight and everything, and
Yeah.
I liked all of that. So already by the time of our third album, which Never Never Comes came from, we really had those Eastern influences were in there. We started to use the Eastern percussion. First of all, actually, we brought in Dinesh. I don't know if you've ever come across him. He's the absolute best Indian percussionist in England. And so we were going to have him just play tablas on Never Never Comes because we thought it goes with the vibe of the song. And when he'd done that, he said, "Can I hear some of the other songs?" And he ended up playing on everything on the album, not just tablas, but he had all these other funny little clay pots and different things that he played. He even had like a tiny little tambourine thing that he put up to the mic, and he'd bend the skin as he was banging it, and it made an amazing sound.
Was it a talking drum?
No, it wasn't a talking drum. It was really like a very small tambourine. But
Oh, of
you have
course, yeah,
to
talking drum's longer, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, you have to have it close to the mic because it wouldn't make a lot of sound on its own. But if it's close to the mic and you tap it and bend the skin, it makes amazing sounds.
Right.
Uh, so that was really the origins of that. First of all, it was the influence of playing around the world,
Right.
and secondly, with the kind of instruments we started to use at that point. I think actually even since then, world music has always been an aspect of music that I do. I had one album of my own that I put out that had a lot of world music on there. It just
Mm.
fascinates me because I've always liked things you haven't really heard before.
Yeah.
And if you take a weird influence and then you do your version of it, like essentially the Beatles did their version of American R&B, and then you end up with something completely new, hopefully.
Mm. What about Final Symphony? Because that is rather epic, may I say.
Well,
Explain the origins of that one.
well, I think it sort of started off with a bit of a sort of Led Zeppelin feel about it, really.
Yeah.
That see, to me, uh, when I'm wondering what you call it. I suppose you call it classic rock now. Like at the time, we thought I think they called it underground. Actually, yeah, I remember when I was a kid. I've got a much older sister in Canada, and she came over and bought me a Jimi Hendrix American album, and a sign that said underground. So underground went on
Mm.
to become heavy metal, but then
Yeah.
heavy metal changed again once Metallica and that generation came in and became something slightly different. So I liked Deep Purple, and I was never a big Sabbath fan, but I remember I did listen to their stuff right at the beginning. But with Zepp, I think the thing with them is they just had the best riffs. Didn't they? They had the absolute best guitar
Yeah.
riffs.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you were to make a top, or at least if I was to make a top 10 of the best classic rock songs of all time, probably half of them would be Zepp songs.
Yeah.
And you just cannot be da 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 da.
Exactly. It's the best.
Like
Yeah.
what could ever be better than that?
Yeah.
So lots of people have tried, and obviously with Purple, dum 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 dum,
Yeah.
it has to be in there. But essentially, there's just something about that era of rock where you have to experience it to know. And as we've been through the era where synthesizers ruled, of course, in the 80s, synthesizers and drum boxes, but still before and after, I have to say, there's just nothing like a heavy guitar and hard drums.
Mm.
And pretty much the youth of the world, ever since those early bands, I guess, have known. It just communicates something, an energy to you.
Funny you
So,
should mention that because the new Rolling Stones album is absolute classic. It's just drums and guitar, old school rock and roll like you've never heard. just perfect. It's as if it came out in 1972. It's just the best album. If you get the chance to hear it, it's so good.
Yeah,
It's just so pure and
absolutely.
simple. Mm.
Yeah. Well, of course, Satisfaction and You
Yeah,
Really Got Me.
yeah,
I especially like You Really Got Me because I just think that's amazing how that kind of started everything. You could probably add to that like Wild Thing more really when Hendrix did it than when the Trucks did it.
yeah.
But you know, those early 60s kind of riffs are real interesting because they didn't really have the heavy guitars back then,
No,
but it was the start of those sort of rock riffs. So to your question about Final Symphony, that was
yeah,
really the start of it. Was let's try and do a classic rock riff and give it all the you know, the oomph that we possibly can with the guitar and the drums, and everything followed from there. But in the lyrics, there's a kind of reflection. Somebody said to me, "It's funny that you call it Final Symphony, and there's no orchestra in there. It's all guitar, and drums, and synth." And it's because reflecting back to our earlier years. I mean, I was a terrible egomaniac. You know, I mean, Gary referred to this a little bit when you were interviewing him. BP said to me, "You know, do you hear what Gary said?" I said, "Well, he's right." You know, that was the fact. When we're in our 20s, you know, we're terrible egotists, and everybody kind of wants to push themselves to the front and push everybody back.
mm.
But now at this stage of life, it doesn't matter anymore. We don't have that desire.
Yeah,
And so in the Final Symphony, I'm kind of reflecting on the fact that, you know, an orchestra only shines when all the different parts do their bit,
mm.
right? You know, I mean, if you're lucky, you could get a solo violin or a solo oboe or something which can sound nice on its own. But when everything comes in, then it sounds amazing. And
Yeah,
so allowing everybody to shine, you know, to have their moments. And that's very much what we did on this song and this album. And it's the better for it, isn't it? You know,
definitely. I
it's,
mean, the instruments throughout all the tracks are very, very well crafted. They do have their place, and they are, yeah, really, really good.
well, some of the parts, like, you know, you asked about No Do-Overs and the
Mm.
guitar and the wind instrument. And sometimes I would hear a part and it really was, um, I thought that's just too good to not let the public hear. And
Yeah,
that's what, like with Color Me the Sky, you said it's very prog. The reason it ended up very prog was I kept hearing guitar things on there. I thought this is good. This deserves to be featured. So it started off as a regular 3 minute type, you know, pop rock song.
mm.
And then first of all, he played that nylon string acoustic,
Yeah.
which was something we'd never had before. So you got the classical guitar. And actually, I can see what you mean with, because I'm thinking Steve Howe now. When he used to
A little
have
bit, yes.
he used to have these special things that like circled around the different guitars, like he could play in one
We'd have an
song.
acoustic guitar on a stand, and then you go for the
Exactly,
guitar string.
exactly. You know, I was thinking if we ever had to do this live, Gary would probably have to get one of those.
Yeah,
Um, and then later on in the song, when there's this heavy riff, and to me, it was sort of reminiscent a little bit of kind of like ELO or a Bachman Turner Overdrive.
yeah.
You know, this kind of captures what's great about classic rock and roll. And then BP says to me, "We should have an orchestra in this." And I was, oh my goodness. I like, oh no, I know how much work that's going to be. But anyway, I took it on. So I made the orchestra. So they're all very happy with the orchestra. And next thing, BP says, "I think we need a choir as well." So, oh no, that's really going to be difficult. And so by the time we're done all of that, I said, "This has got to be the ending of the album because we're never going to be able to follow this, you know?"
Oh, it's a fantastic track. I think your fans are going to love it. Absolutely.
It's sort of, I call it our stairway to heaven.
Yep. Yeah, it's not
Like
far
I
off.
say, it starts off very simple, and next thing it's going into all these different movements, as it were. So we did actually have a song at the end of our second album that the fans liked a lot, which was "I Will Return." It's called, and
Mm.
it sort of do a bit of a journey where it was. To me, it was kind of like, you know, when Donna Summer did MacArthur Park, and so it's got a slow part, and then it
Yeah.
suddenly double beat, and then it comes back to the slow part. It was sort of like that, but I think "Color Me the Sky" is way better.
Oh, and your third track, Wretched, has a beautiful, haunting melody to it.
Yeah, well, Wretched, musically, when it started off, I was really thinking in terms of kind of like OMD, in the early
Yeah,
days when they do the more melodic songs.
yeah.
Like my favorite song by them, I like, Enola Gay and those things, but I think my favorite one by theirs, I think it was called Souvenir.
Oh yeah,
And it was
great
just,
tracks.
yeah, it was just because a lot of times with classics, people want to, when they're doing interviews, they want to talk to us about the so-called new romantic thing and the Blitz Club and all of that, because that was our era. And in those clubs right at the beginning, where everybody was dressing crazy like peacocks, the music was supposed to be kind of electronic-y, but there
Mm,
wasn't a lot of electronic music going at that time. So they could play Kraftwerk, they could play a little bit of Bowie, and OMD in the early Human League before they had the girls. That was pretty much the music
mm,
that you had. And so I've always admired OMD for that reason. They were there very, very early. And the bands that just didn't have guitar and drums, they only had synths and boxes, that was them. It was Human League and it was OMD before anybody else. And so in a way, it was a certain nod to the 80s, but a particular kind of thing in the 80s. And
mm.
so the very sort of electronic kind of ballad, you could say. And in the lyrics, there's another kind of reflection about when we look back at all the mistakes we made, and now we're older, we should be wiser, but we're still making all the same mistakes, aren't we? It's not like when we get to 50 or 60, suddenly we've arrived and that's it, and we've got everything together. And so that's kind of what Wretched is. It's this sort of moody moment of, I mean, I wouldn't like to exactly call it sad. BP says it's depressing. He likes it, but he says it's depressing. The lyrics and that. So no, it's not supposed to be depressing. It's just reflective. That's what it is. It's reflective.
Yeah, no, it's a really lovely track. I like it very much indeed. The whole album is superb, and I've listened to it several times now, and I'm not bored of it at all, which is always a good
Well,
sign.
well, we hope the fans, when they first hear it, they just want to go back to the beginning and listen over again, and
Yeah,
make the journey.
no,
Because
yeah,
who was it I heard the other day talking about when we used to, with vinyl records as kids, and we'd carry it under our arm and we'd be really
mm,
proud that the
yeah.
new album that we just bought, and it was an event, wasn't it, with the artwork and everything to
The
do with
sleeve and the little booklets inside, and yeah,
exactly, yeah, looking at all the lyrics
absolutely.
and all the little details about who did what. I mean,
Mm.
fun enough, it's amusing.